Gil's going to, VK3GDP, is going to talk on things space-related. So I'll introduce Gil to come up, and he'll give his presentation. So thank you.
Here. Otherwise I'm going to float into space. That's the problem. All right. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Gil. I've been a member now for just under a year. Completed my foundation, and I'm going to talk today about taking the next generation to space camp. But previously, before meeting you all, actually I'm going to explain it as part of the presentation, so I won't go too much into it. But and you'll also, I think, get a really good idea as to why I am a member of the club and pursuing radio technology and all the rest of it. So let's begin. Let's use the old Wayback Machine. I'm sure everyone here knows this. When I show this to people my age, they go, I don't understand. Who's Mr. Peabody and why is he a dog? But let's wind the machine back to 1983. And here in Australia, we had some really interesting things going on. Of course, we've got Dick Smith, who I'm sure everyone is familiar with here in this room. He circumnavigated the world in his helicopter. We won the Australia's Cup, and of course, Bob Hawke, who was our Prime Minister, made that very famous speech that if anyone gets sacked for taking the day off today, your boss was a bum. If you were in Melbourne at the time, we also had that horrible dust storm that overtook the city, which even as a little boy, I remember being sick at home and being in my bed and the whole room going dark. It was just something that I think will only happen once in a lifetime. And the biggest film of that year was Phar Lap. So, just puts things into perspective if you were around at that time. But there was also one really huge, big event. And for me, it really did change my life, especially as a young man. And that was the launch of the space shuttle. STS-1 proved the design and technology that had been going on since the 60s. And for me, personally, this is my era's vehicle. I know, I feel bad saying this, but I met lots and lots of people who were telling me they remember when Sputnik went up and when the Mercury missions went and Gemini and Apollo. When I was born, it was just coming to the end of the Apollo mission. I'm unfortunate to say that, I'm going to say my age, in the 51 years that I've been alive, no man has returned to the moon. As far as I'm concerned, it's incredible that that hasn't happened. But as a young man, this was the ticket into space. This was going to change everything. And as a 6-year-old, my mother still reminds me that I was stuck to a television documentary talking about the upcoming space flight of the space shuttle. So you're going to see lots and lots of references to the space shuttle. It's one of the reasons why my uniform today is what is basically the space shuttle uniform and was originally what was designed for astronauts to use on the system. If you like this presentation, you really want to go into what happened with the space shuttle program, I can talk ad nauseum, but we're not going to do that today. So for me, something really interesting happened also in this year, and that was that I learnt about a thing called Space Camp. Again, part of the Wayback Machine experience, I found this program that was playing on television. That's incredible. I don't know, everyone remember that? It was kind of like a current affairs type program aimed at a family audience that kind of spoke about all the different things that were going around the world to a certain level of spectacle. And on That's Incredible, they talked about a thing called Space Camp, where children and teenagers were going and they were learning the fundamental foundations of science. They were being aimed at the next generation of astronauts that were going to go into space using this new space transport system, otherwise known as the space shuttle. And as a precocious 7 or 9-year-old, I've got to remember my math here. Sorry, as a 9-year-old, I wanted to go to space camp. But it being the 80s and the fact that my parents lived in Melbourne, Australia, and knew no one in the US, what are you going to do? Put a 9-year-old on a flight and send him over to America hoping that something nasty wasn't going to happen to him? I also knew that was not going to happen. But I learnt as much as I could, not only about the US space program, but also about Space Camp. And little did I know that I would have the opportunity 33 years later to actually attend Space Camp. And why I want to explain this is, this could be a presentation. I could have brought my old slide machine, put it out here, and we could have spent the next hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. So if anyone here is going to take medication in the next 3 hours, do it now. Oh, you guys are a hard audience. If you don't laugh, you don't smile, you don't give me feedback, I just want to warn you, I do interpretive dance about the space. You don't want to see that. It's a punishment. But why I explain this right now is that this was a bit of a journey for me. And it wasn't just turning up and taking students to NASA and Space Camp. For me, this was the closing of a circle that started when I was quite young and passionate. So how did I get there? How did I get the opportunity to travel halfway around the world and get an insight not only to what children and teenagers can do at Space Camp, but also why this is being used to promote STEM. Oh, it didn't do. Okay. So in 2019, I worked for the Department of Education in New South Wales, and my job was to introduce technology to the public teachers in the public school system. So right now, around that time, 3D printers and lasers and Arduino boards and electronics, they were all being directed at the education department, and all the teachers were like, you crazy? I don't want to deal with this. I got 30 students in my class, and you want me to become an electronics wizard or anything? I'm not going to do it. So my job with my team was to go in there and support the teachers and basically explain and give them the experience that if they take on this technology, while there is a bit of a learning curve, once you're able to incorporate it into your lesson plans, it actually takes a lot of the lift away from them. And one of the things that I was tasked to do was identify different types of technology that we could incorporate. And there was a company there that were trying to sell us these little robots that students could teach themselves how to code and get real-world experience. And as I walked up to the presentation, they had another presentation on the right-hand side, which was a thing that they ran called Space School. And I immediately forgot about the robots and stuff, and I said, that's Space Camp. You're taking students to Space Camp. And they said, how did you know that? And I just started explaining my passion, and immediately they said, you have to come as what they call a group leader to Space Camp. So that's how I ended up coming in. I was actually given a class of 20 students who were funded by their parents to go all the way from Sydney to, our first stop was in Dallas, Texas, and then all the way to Huntsville, Alabama. So if you've ever traveled with your kids, you know that it can be a little bit of a trying time. Try that with 20 students who you don't know and you meet 10 minutes before you walk through customs. I must say, my students were amazing. And one of the things that I tried to explain to them too when I first met them was, this wasn't just a trip for them going to Space Camp. This was a trip for me to go to Space Camp. And I must say, every time they got to do something and the general managers of the teams were set outside, they would be like, Gil's got to do it too. And you'll see some examples of that. So normally when I do talk about this in a more teaching environment, I kind of break down what it was that we did and how it applies to STEM. But I'll be honest with you, I just want to show you the cool stuff. And also I want to share with you some of the stuff that I learned, that even though I kind of understood some of this from a distance, it was incredible experience to see it firsthand, and it absolutely blew my mind. So just a breakdown of what we're going to go through. There's 2 sections. We took them for 2 weeks. We spent 1 week in Houston, where what I'm going to show you here is the Johnson Space Center, which is the headquarters for NASA. It's now become also the home for the Astronaut Corps. So the Office of the Astronaut Corps are now situated in Johnson Space Center, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the second week we went to the United States Space and Rocket Center, also known as the USSRC. Very interesting acronym, as some of my students like to point out, at Huntsville, Alabama. that area is actually tied in with Marshall Rocket Center. So that's where Wernher von Braun went and tested all the different technology that was needed in the American space program. So yeah, that's a quick breakdown. We'll go through it. Before we actually start talking about the different areas, let me introduce you to the amazing students that I went with. This is probably half an hour into them meeting me, and they were absolutely awesome. They were incredible kids. I was terrified. I thought, oh, this is going to be an incredibly difficult 2 weeks where I'm going to be on 24 hours a day, and I was, but they made it, it could have been a lot worse, that's for sure. And while we were there, we did a lot of project and STEM type activities that weren't directly tied in with NASA. So some of the things we went to is, in Dallas, there's a fantastic museum there, and you can see everyone under this incredible diorama of the moon, which is something that's fabulous. And while we were there as well, they undertook practical sessions. So here they're doing a session on biology, where they're actually dissecting a gummy shark of all things. I was like, all the way from Australia, and they get to we could have done that in Port Phillip Bay. Why are we over here? They also, in an alignment for what we were going to do, they were also introduced to microscopic bacteria and all the rest of it. These were outside events that had been coordinated to give the students an idea that there was more going on in an environment than what you would expect. And it also gave them a look at how this world works. A lot of the students here, they're actually taking cultures from their phones, because it works out that your cell phone is one of the dirtiest things that you are ever going to have on your body at all times. As the students learned very quickly, most people take their phone to the bathroom. And that is the main source of a lot of oral infections and stuff like that. So this wasn't just going and doing a sightseeing tour. This was an actual program that integrated a lot of science knowledge and showed them how that application would lead to some of the amazing discoveries and events that have happened in the past. So let's start at what they call now the Space Center Houston, which is, I think, all of us know as Johnson Space Center. I didn't get a photo of this, but one of the things that blew me away when we were driving in was at where this photo is taken, and you've got two T-38 Talon aircraft that are mounted. As we're going around the corner, I looked out the window and I went, I know this place. And I was like, this is freaky. How do I know this? And then realized that all those years when I was growing up with my parents and watching I Dream of Jeannie, they always had that card of saying that, like, Major Nelson was at NASA. It literally is a photo of the entrance of the Space Center. And I just remember thinking to myself, gosh, I really wish I had gotten that photo. So I got a bit of a kick going, I know this is the first time I'm here, but it's also something that I'm kind of familiar with. One thing I also, just before we move forward, my interest in the space program has always been a lot of the reason why I went down certain pathways in my life. So as a young man, I learned to scuba dive because I knew that was part of astronaut training. I got myself a license to fly gliders because it was as close as one could get to an aircraft license at a university without having to put money out. And one of the first things I did when I started going to university was I discovered the internet. And at the time, use groups, yes. And one of the use groups was set up for astronaut candidates. So I got very involved in that, talking to people who were actively applying to become an astronaut. And that plays in a little bit when we move forward, because there was a whole bunch of people that I ended up getting to know online, and some of them actually were successful and ended up going into space, spending time on the ISS, and also flying space shuttle missions. Being able to go finally to Johnson Space Center, some of them were actually still there and working, so I got an opportunity, and we'll talk about that. I was going to explain that in the introduction, completely forgot about it. So the very famous NASA meatball is the first thing you're greeted by. Again, my generation, it's the NASA worm, the little red stencil of NASA. I need to change this to the NASA worm if I'm going to use this as a space shuttle suit. But it was incredible to walk through those doors and realize that this is really where everything happened. And the first place we stopped off was Mission Control. So Mission Control is for the International Space Station. It is active 24 hours a day. I don't know about anyone else, but if I'm taking photos with my phone, especially now that the cameras on the phones are so amazing, I'm forever zooming in to see what I can read and what I can see. And I think these were all active real-time feeds from the International Space Station. Up here is a photo of all the astronauts that are on the mission at the time. Obviously, you can see these are all simulations. It's really interesting to discover that a lot of the official NASA records of a lot of the probes that go out into the solar system are all now three-dimensional renderings. They are the official record of these events. So they take all the telemetry and in real time generate a three-dimensional image. Usually it's a video, and they become the official record. So you can see up here, obviously there aren't cameras that far away from the International Space Station, but in real time they're taking all the different telemetry to give the people working in Mission Control a visual understanding of what's going on, because we are human beings. Our vision is how we interpret the world. I couldn't help myself. I had to take a selfie to make sure that I knew that I was there, and of course the students are sitting there having everything explained to them. So again, for me, it was like, okay, I've learned all about this, I understand what they're doing, I can actually see this happening in real time. From Mission Control, we went over to a place called the Space Vehicle Mock-up Facility. And this is a really interesting place because it's one of the biggest buildings in the Space Center. Of course, the biggest building that NASA has is in Kennedy Space Center in Florida, which is the Vehicle Assembly Building, which happens to be so big that the building itself has a different weather pattern than outside. It happens to rain inside that building when there's enough condensation compared to the weather outside. So we're talking a huge building. But this one houses every piece of equipment that's in space that is manned, so that if there's any problems, let's say with a module in the International Space Station, they can come recreate that problem and work out a solution. So there's a bit of a walkway. I don't know why it's not doing that. So as we enter, you can see on the right-hand side, this is the area for all the different modules in the space station. And again, I'm biased, so anytime I see anything to do with the space shuttle, I'm going to focus on that. But that's, even though the space shuttle program had been retired, a fully rated mock-up of the cabin crew, no, they're the people who go in there. The shuttle's cabin is there so that they can simulate anything that goes wrong. Just to let you guys know, I have a little 1-year-old who right now has got a hand, foot, and mouth. I haven't got it, otherwise I wouldn't be there. So it's been a very long morning and day. That's why I got to catch myself with what I'm saying. So looking back, you can see all the different modules that are there. So obviously NASA provides, or America provides, let's say, the Quest and the Destiny and the Columbus module. And it's really interesting. It's only when I got back and I started looking at these photos that I realized that on the wall, they had the 2 mission badges of Challenger, which I spelt wrong, and Columbia. So on the wall is the reminder of what can actually happen if people don't do their jobs right. And it's incredibly moving. It's one of the things that I get caught up every 5 or 6 years in cycles where I go through all the different papers, all the engineering papers, all the different reports, and about what happened with both those missions. My wife thinks I'm obsessive with it. But I think there's a lot to be learned, but that's for another presentation. Okay. As I was saying before, this is the mock-up, well, not mock-up, this is not space rated, but as functional as you need version of the space shuttle. And you can see here the outer airlock as opposed to the crew cabin. And it's a really interesting thing because if you hear about, astronauts do an EVA, but when you actually see the space within the crew cabin, I guess the guys are going out into these things, it's literally like a tent. It is incredible to think that this thing can be taken off and they can stick more equipment into the shuttle bay, or they can keep it in and give the astronauts a chance to go in and out for extra vehicle maneuvering. This thing here is also very interesting. This was added onto the shuttle after the Challenger, I don't want to say explosion because it was an explosion, Challenger disaster. And it was part of a system that would allow the astronauts a chance to bail out during takeoff. We'll talk about that because that was also something that was really interesting that I learned from an astronaut who rode the shuttle 3 times. On the other side of that, you can see all the EVA suits. And this is, again, one of those situations where I'm trying to see as much detail as I can, and as well as the hatch, the entrance and egress hatch, which I was fascinated about and we'll talk about when we get to another simulator. And it's very interesting. That hatch has been a focus of many astronauts with many different stories. I'll share with one in a second. As we got to this point, I looked down and I saw this, which happened to be the Starliner from Boeing. And at the time, I believe it was like December 19th that we were there. And you see these guys here? Well, they're planning, come on. So they're working through the scheduled test flight of that capsule unmanned. Now, we got super excited about that because we were going to be in America and we were going to see the Starliner go on top of a Falcon X, and we were waiting to see what happened. This was 2019. We all know what happened. It didn't fly. And in fact, we even know what happened when it did fly. 2 astronauts who were supposed to be in space for 8 days became the luckiest astronauts as far as I'm concerned, because they got to spend 6 months on the International Space Station, which I'm telling you, you won the lottery if that's something that you were trained for the rest of your life. So it was really interesting to be able to see that facility being used in real time. And again, me being cheeky, I'm zooming in trying to read all the documentation, but this was the photo of basically the engineering team getting, briefing all the techs so that they could go and get permission for the launch from NASA's side. Moving further down, I'm biased. This happens to be a mock-up of the robotic arm on the space shuttle. But why I really wanted to show you this photo is keep a look at all these different pennants that are on the wall. Wasn't too sure what that was about, but as we went further down, I saw an old friend, and I consider it an old friend. This is one of 2 manned maneuvering units that went up into space. You probably all remember the photo of an astronaut with a jetpack by themselves that ended up happening on STS-6. And it was a big thing in the day because this was the first time a human being became a satellite. So a lone person went into orbit by themselves. 2 of them were used. Unfortunately, again, due to the accident with Challenger, which changed the whole program, they would never fly again, and they would not allow astronauts to use them. So this one lives, obviously, in the vehicle building, and we'll see where the other one lives in a little bit. We got to meet these guys. These guys are called Robonauts, and the idea with these guys is that they want to create a robotic humanoid shape that they can then send out for EVAs. The idea was for these guys to live literally outside the International Space Station, and if there was a problem, they would use virtual reality or augmented reality no, virtual reality more than anything else, to manipulate the robots so that they could change or fix anything that was a problem. Unfortunately, because of the shelf life of the International Space Station, they are not going to be deployed as they were planned, but they're still working on them, because if there is going to be a mission to Mars or further out, they will be the robots that will keep the vehicle in good working order if they need to have an EVA. There was also, I was told that this was originally planned for going back to the moon. So instead of having the lunar rover that is exposed, but they're also looking at this design for a Mars mission. So the idea is that this would be a fully contained environment. It wouldn't just be someone in a suit in a dune buggy, and it would also work as a shelter on whatever planet they're going to use. And this is kind of interesting, because as we're coming up to this and we're all looking at the design and marveling, I'm starting to realize and look in the background and realize that all the equipment they're using here is exactly the same equipment you have in the workshop downstairs. And this happened to be the closest area that I saw where people could come and try out ideas, work out engineering concepts. And to me, this was the closest to a makerspace that I saw in NASA. All the pennants, by the way, that I mentioned before, they're all awards that the team using this area have won. So I said this to my students: don't think that rocket science, you have to have the best and the latest and the greatest. Because that bandsaw is something that I've been trying to get a hold of for the last probably 20 years. It's called a Delta bandsaw. It's a very famous American bandsaw that you literally could buy at Sears, and it's probably older than I am. So that was a real kind of moment. When we came to the end of this, to my surprise, we were met at the bottom of the stairwell, and it worked out that someone that I had done some work with online knew that I was coming and knew I was going to be there, and actually was like, hey, come on in. And unfortunately, because all the students weren't able to go into this area, and I wasn't going to leave them, it didn't happen. But it was really, for me, it was a big kick out of, here I am at this place for the first time, and I'm running into people that either know me or I know them. After this, because this was like an official tour, they took us to a place called Rocket Park. And you can see there some of the, just on the left-hand side there, the Redstone rocket with a Mercury rocket, or Mercury capsule really, on the top. The other rocket here is what they use to test what they call a boilerplate capsule. So the idea is they'll use that to send up the Apollo crew capsule and to see if it aerodynamically works or not. Really kind of interesting area. You can see all these different things around. I'll show you what they are. But at the back of it is this huge big building. And this is where the only surviving Saturn V that's rated for spaceflight lives. Originally they put this on the lawn, but the weather was getting to it, so they decided they would put it in. I took this photo just to show the sheer depth, but if you take a look at the engines with the students, this is an incredible beast. Incredible. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm always into the details. So I had to take a close-up of all the intricate plumbing of these incredible engines. Yeah, I've seen many photos, I've seen the videos, the film footage, I've read manual schematics. Nothing is close to actually seeing it in real life. This is an incredible beast, especially when you think about each stage. It was less than 18 minutes to an orbit. These things didn't last very long, but they were incredibly complex engineering and size. And again, just to give you an idea, I wouldn't know where to begin to go and fix that, but I'd like to give it a try. This is the end of the first stage, and you can see with the students here, you can see how big it is. We then moved on to the second stage. I don't know if anyone here is a model maker or not, make little plastic models and stuff like that. This sort of detail was always something I was fascinated with. So again, I had to take a few snapshots of it. And then, of course, we got the third stage here, all the different nitrogen tanks, because at this point, there's nothing in the atmosphere to burn anything. Again, I don't know. I appreciate it, so I hope you guys will as well. And then that's the bottom of the third stage. You could cross over. And that happens to be the reverse of where the lunar module would be placed. So at that point, they would release the dock. They would go in, grab the lunar module, dock with it, and then take it to the moon. Again, huge, huge vehicle, just incredible. And there you've got the command module. Now I asked someone, why is it brown? And it worked out that over time it oxidized. So that, I thought it was actually like a plug, like a test plug or something like that. No, this was the original capsule that would have gone to the moon for Apollo 18. Got to remember, 17 was the last one, so 18. From here, we decided we were going to give the kids a bit of a break because I'm geeking out, and the kids are going, okay, hey, this is really cool, but I don't really have a reference point. So we ended up going to Rice University because this was an educational trip. So we wanted to show them what a university in America was like, but the important part for me and for the program was Rice University was where JFK pledged to go to the moon and back by the end of the decade. So behind me is the football field that famous speech and that dedication was done. While we were there, an elderly gentleman came up to me, obviously heard our accents and went, "Where are you guys from?" I said, "Australia." And they said, "Do you want to see the car from Back to the Future?" And unfortunately, I think the kids got a bigger kick out of that than what we were doing. So he had an original DeLorean and was very kind to let every person sit in the car and take a photo. But they got a big kick out of that. So I've got to share it. Interesting thing about the DeLorean, we all know it from the film. When you starts up, it sounds like a Victor lawnmower going. The engine was, if it wasn't a two-stroke, I'd be real surprised. But it was kind of cool to see in real life. Now, we ended up going back another day to the Johnson Space Center, and as I said, I'm a big fan of the Space Shuttle program. This pretty famous image, they used to cart the shuttle around on the back of a 747. Before that, the Enterprise, which was the landing test vehicle, used to go up, and they used to separate to do all the glide tests. And when you get to the other side of the Space Center, one of the original or the only surviving 747 that was outfitted to transport the shuttle is there, with a shuttle called Independence, which was a training vehicle for astronauts. Again, complete mock-up and training vehicle, pretty amazing. Now, there's a building in the background, so you would walk up these stairs and go to different levels, and the first level would take you to the inside and the interior of that 747. Interesting that most of it's gutted, but the first class passenger lounge was still set up for people to travel with the shuttle as it was going. And I had to take a photo of the table because they had engraved the image of the shuttle and the NASA worm there. But if you go downstairs, everything was reinforced. So they had gutted all the seats out of it, all the galleys and all the rest of it, and reinforced the roof to support the weight of the shuttle. And you can literally walk the length of that aircraft. It's really interesting. I don't think I put the photo in, but on the side, it had every flight that the aircraft had taken. And at the end, there were 3 flights I wasn't familiar with, which were actually test flights for a thing called an X-ray. I think was it a Boeing, or was it was one of the aerospace companies was trying a new design that they wanted to pitch to the Air Force, and they actually used this vehicle to see if it was aerodynamically designed the way it was. It's another image of Independence. And of course, I'm the happiest guy alive to be this close to any sort of shuttle equipment. One of the things that I knew about, but I hadn't seen it for myself, is that every tile designed for re-entry is numbered. So all of these are put on to the shuttle and serviced by hand. They are all kind of carved to fit. And I was, again, blown away at that every tile had a reference number. So if something came off, or if there was a problem with something, they could literally trace it back. Which probably isn't too surprising, because if you ever have surgery and have something medically placed within you, the law basically states that you have to be able to track it. Now they use RFID, so they don't have to cut you open to find out what the manufacturing model was. Inside, I finally got to see basically the commander and the pilot's galley. This one, or seats, this one is for the commander. He always takes the left-hand side. Fun fact, when the shuttle lands, it's not the pilot that lands the space shuttle, it's actually the commander that glides it down to its final destination. Something that kind of irked me a little bit, because if there was one thing I wanted to do since I was a little kid, it was always to pilot the space shuttle. So I got a chance to actually see where the pilot sits. Usually most of the pilot's duties is actually on takeoff. But I always thought it was ironic that the commander got to fly and land the vehicle as opposed to the pilot. But c'est la vie, that's what happens. The area is so small and so compressed, I couldn't take a photo to show everyone exactly how small. But if you've ever been in like an ergo van or Ervans that were big in the 80s, they actually had more space in them than the 3 different levels. It was mind-boggling to think that usually they had 7 astronauts in one of these things. You were on top of each other all the time. And speaking to some of the people who had been on a number of space missions when they were training, there's no modesty. If you needed to get changed and put a spacesuit on, which usually meant you had to strip down, you did it in front of everyone. With one bathroom, same situation. I was talking to you guys before about the hatch. Really, I think this is interesting, and I'll share this. Before Challenger, they saw the space shuttle as almost like taking an airline flight. And if you were able to book a satellite being deployed on the space shuttle, there's a very good chance that they would let someone from the company or country that was involved with that deployment onto the space shuttle. And it worked out that there was the son of a very prominent world leader who went through astronaut training and was so fascinated by the crew hatch that the commander of the flight put a padlock on the hatch handle because they were a little worried that he may freak out halfway through the flight and actually open it up. Hence why I'm not saying exactly who it was. So it's probably the only time in the history of spaceflight that the emergency hatch actually was locked because there was a commitment to take the son of this person up onto the flight. But people were questioning what he might do in an emergency. Again, very small. It's really interesting to think about that this hatch would fit one male, full-grown male, as I am, through quite easily. Later on, as we'll see, there was a lot more equipment that astronauts were wearing. I don't know how they would have got out of there in a very short time. One of my students with a takeoff and landing suit, and again, you can see here, this is the lower deck where they stored all their food and equipment in. It was incredibly small. You could walk out to the back, and you would basically go into the shuttle's. Wow, it's been a big day. I should know this without even thinking about it. What am I talking? Help me out here. Cargo hold. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Whew. This is the cargo hold. They have a mock-up of a satellite. Obviously, the doors are closed. Again, to stand there and actually see it, the photos, unfortunately, photos don't have depth. Again, probably the middle of an Irvan. It is incredibly small. You'd think that the space shuttle, when you see it, is like we all fly in 737s and these 300-seat planes and all this sort of stuff. When you get there, it is way more like a glider than you actually kind of think about. How we're going. All right, we're not going to get through all of it, but that's okay. The suit that I'm wearing is based on the suit on the left. The space shuttle was designed for what they call an open air atmosphere. Unfortunately, again, after Challenger, they started putting the astronauts into pressure suits. I still ask the question, how is someone dressed in a pressure suit going to get out of that small hatch, especially if they're in free fall? I got to meet a guy called Mike Mullins, who was an astronaut who flew a shuttle mission before Challenger and the first mission after Challenger. So after the 3 years where they revised it. And I asked him the question after I got to know him and felt comfortable to ask him about something that was so sensitive. And I said, did the astronauts feel that they had a survivability rate rise after NASA put all these things into place? And without missing a beat, he kind of chuckled and he said, Gil, all the astronauts knew exactly what we had signed up for. We called the drills that they had now put into place busy work while dying. Their whole understanding was they just didn't want them to look out the window as they fell back to Earth. So again, it's really kind of an interesting, that phrase and that understanding actually became something that I incorporate almost in everything that I do now. And I mentioned it to Mike when I ran into him a couple of years later, and he said, I'm sorry I've told you that. If someone wants me to do a job and for whatever reason, I always ask myself, is this something that's going to be meaningful, or is this just something to keep me busy as the next day towards the time that I shuffle off this earth is all about? Pretty interesting that that's the thing that I got more than anything else. A lot of people go, astronauts would have no chance whatsoever. A lot of people don't realize that for the first 4 flights of the space shuttle, they had ejector seats for a certain part of that takeoff period. I always think to myself, that's pretty amazing. If you actually got out of the shuttle, you also had 2 solid booster rockets that were pumping a lot of things. You would have been barbecued, but those seats were still part of Columbia till STS-7, but they were deactivated. The pilots and the commanders of a mission with more than 2 crew members on board said, we're not going to eject and leave other people on board. But a lot of people, there's a lot of arguments on whether that was even possible or not. So I think it's kind of interesting that, and to see that in person was like, okay. Again, you can see the difference between the shuttle suits. Before my time, but Skylab, obviously very famous for a lot of the debris hitting Western Australia. They had a mock-up of the inside of Skylab, which was the third stage of a Saturn V rocket. And again, I was sitting there or standing there really, and I'm thinking to myself, I've seen some of this before. Where did I see this? And then I realized that all these pads were the same pads that I saw in Star Wars. So again, you can see where people got a lot of design and ideas. Of course, the Falcon never flew into space. You would never need to have those crash pads, but I always thought it was a really kind of cool that they actually came out of something that was really functional. And the idea being, if astronauts are floating and they had a mock-up of an astronaut there, so you could see the scale of what they actually had access to in the 70s, which was supposed to be the precursor to the shuttle program. The shuttle was always supposed to go to a space station, not be the destination, hence why it was called the shuttle. Unfortunately, it took a long time to get there. It happens to be the wind tunnel test model to see if the shuttle was aerodynamically feasible. Again, I like old school technology, and one of the things I loved is you can see here where they've actually added things like Bondo to change the shape of the nose, and you can see some of that also on the wings. So big steel model of the shuttle that would go in with all these little paper tickets on it, and they could visually see the airflow. That happens to be my screensaver at work. It's always something that I like to remind myself of. Just because you can do it using a computer doesn't mean it's always the best way to do it. Another beautiful model of the shuttle. And then later that day, we ended up meeting a guy called Rick Henfleet. And Rick was one of the, on the shuttle program, he was in mission control, and he was basically in charge of keeping an eye on what the solid booster rockets were doing. And he came and talked to the students about taking risks, about being able to push boundaries. And one of the things that were really interesting about that was that he had these 3 plates that were taken from the International Space Station, and it had been hit by a micrometeorite debris. You can see where the entry point was. Well, the livable areas of the International Space Station has 3 different layers to absorb the kinetic energy of these things. So you can see the little hole there. You can see that just like a bullet, it spreads out. And then obviously the 3rd layer catches all of that through. So it was a real great practical explanation of physics for these students. He also had another example of that came from some, the stuff we put in our roofs. Help me out here, guys. Insulation, that's the one, where again, it was hit by a very small particle, and because of the speeds that it was traveling, the transference of that kinetic energy creates that, and it was a real kick to be able to see the lights going on in the students' eyes as they were starting to understand how all of this applied. We went back that night to Johnson Space Center, and because it was Christmas, they get someone to fund all these Christmas light things at night, so you can see all my students are under the Christmas lights. We went back to Rocket Park. It's my roommate and other team member who, for some reason, used to jump in my arms every time there was a photo. I was scared by the end of it we were going to be engaged, but he was a great guy anyway. And this is the building that I was telling you about that had the Saturn V. And they did this really amazing thing where they started using projectors to project a story of a young child being inspired to become an astronaut on the rockets themselves. And it was really well done. So you would go down and you would see these kind of loops of this animated story of this child. Starts with the globe and the astronaut, and then it's kind of like his journey as he actually goes into space. But more important than that, I took this as an opportunity to jump over the guardrails and actually touch the Saturn V, which for me was, again, one of these really important things, because people end up having, the way human beings connect with things is also by touching them, tactile. It's why everyone goes to Europe and touches those really old buildings. My students loved it because they were like, you're doing something wrong, and they were able to let me know before the guards came out. And then basically here is one of the original mission control panels that was there. They were celebrating 50 years of the Apollo mission. So that was awesome to be able to sit there. I know I've got 10 minutes, I've got to do the rest of it, so it's not a problem, but let me know if you want me to keep going. Our next stop was Space Camp, which was Huntsville, which is the United States Space and Rocket Center, Marshall Flight Space Center. What you're first greeted with is this incredible mock-up of the Saturn V. So this is the first thing we saw. And then the second thing we saw was another mock-up of the space shuttle. This one is called Pathfinder. I'll show it to you in a second. And of course, I am thrilled just to be there. So, 3 years, and I'm finally at where I'd like to be. There were many times we lived on site. So the first thing you would see is the Pathfinder shuttle on a stack. The Pathfinder was a wooden mock-up that they used to make sure that everything would fit when they would use it, especially when they're getting Columbia. It was donated to Space Camp. The fuel tank is just a wooden mock-up, but the solid booster rockets are what they called carbon fiber filament spun cases. The idea originally was to spin these cases, lower the weight so they could take more up into space, but unfortunately at the time they could never get it to work. So these were rated and tested, and in fact towards the end of the space shuttle program, NASA came and took some of the equipment off these and actually flew it into space. So while everything else is a mock-up, there are definitely space-rated equipment on Pathfinder. Interesting thing, I don't know if you guys can see it, but right there is a missing part of the wing made out of wood. So last time I was there, Pathfinder was missing as they got carpenters to actually fill that wood piece back up. I'm going to just zip through a couple of these really quickly. This was just basically a brief of what the students were going to do. The way Space Camp works is there are 3 separate groups, and the students actually go on a simulated mission. So they train for the mission, and they have one run through, and then they actually have a completed mission. So there's a run through over there, what's going to happen. I'll move this over a little bit faster. Oh, so the campers and people staying actually live on site. I had the option of staying at the Hilton. I decided I was going to do the whole experience, and then I regretted it because basically I think that if I was arrested in America, I would have had better accommodations than this. It must be the same thing in the federal thing. The hardest beds and some sort of foam thing, and I'm sure something else going on there. But you do it rough, but it was well worth it. As I said, the Saturn V that's there, and another T16 with Pathfinder in the background. It's kind of cool when you walk around and see these things. They are literally just engines with a few wings on it. You could literally jump in. They're no bigger than a person or 2 people in this case. And again, it's kind of really interesting to see that all this stuff that has been retired is on display. You can actually go up and touch it and take a good look at it. Over there, they also have one of the only other Saturn V rockets. This one wasn't flight rated, but this was the ground test model. So what they would do is they would use this to see if they would light up the engine and see what would shake apart. One of the interesting parts about that as well is that they have a lot of the engineers who worked on this around the museum that you could speak to. They were volunteers, they had retired, but you could actually have conversations with them, and you can see it goes all the way the length of the museum. You've got a Gemini capsule, an original one there as well, and one of the Apollo mission, modules, command modules. I can't remember. Did I put a note here? No, I can't remember what mission. I think it was Apollo 15. I think it was, but don't quote me on that. I thought you guys might really be impressed with this. This is one of the separation rings from the different stages. And what's really interesting about that is if you take a look inside, there's all these like different boxes here, and that was their guidance computers made by IBM back in the day in the 60s. So we're talking old school technology here that ironically cost probably millions in adjusted dollars today that would be lost the minute that stage was finished. So these things would break off, and it became what IBM used to get into the computer industry. And of course, in the 80s, everyone had an IBM or an IBM type cloned computer. Well, this was the first step into that arena for the Apollo mission. Some interesting merchandise. Does anyone know why Snoopy's involved with the Apollo missions?
Apollo 8, wasn't it? Where they did the Christmas broadcast?
Right, so there's Apollo 10.
Right, yeah.
So, sorry, Apollo 10 was the Christmas broadcast. Well, I want to get this right. It was Apollo 9. Apollo 10 had a lunar module that almost went all the way down, but NASA made sure that they didn't have enough fuel, so if they did land, they couldn't get back up. But it was a scouting mission for Apollo 11. Apollo 10's names for the lunar lander and the module was Charlie Brown and Snoopy, but that was because Snoopy became the mascot for the safety program for Apollo. After the modules were named Charlie Brown and Snoopy, every mission afterwards, they had to get approval of what they were going to call it. They didn't think it was too professional to have Houston, Charlie Brown's trying to talk to you. So it's interesting. I believe it was now I'm going to remember Charles Schultz, who was really proud to have Snoopy as the safety mascot, and for NASA's publicity department, they hated the fact that the astronauts called both the command module and the lunar module Charlie Brown and Snoopy. I spoke to you guys before about the manned maneuvering unit. While we were there, there was a hurricane. To our luck, the place that was a shelter was the museum, and for 6 hours we were taken into an area, and I was looking at the only other surviving manned maneuvering unit that had gone into space. And about this 4th hour, I turned to the person who was there and I'm like, can I jump over the barrier and take a photo? And they're like, yeah, go ahead, I'm not gonna throw you out. So, in the middle of a hurricane, I fell in love all over again and was able to actually touch and take a photo of the unit that went up on STS-41C. Again, to me, this was a huge moment. I was actually able to not only touch something that had been into space, but this is where, since I was a little kid, this is all I wanted out of life. I just wanted to challenge myself and go and explore. So yeah, when that photo went on social media, quite a few people kind of commented that that my wife might have a little bit of a challenge. I might not come home, but it was, again, the opportunity to be able to do that and see that. Once I did that, I actually spoke to someone and they were like, you do know that if there was anything left in those tanks, you'd probably be dead. And I was like, it was worth it. It was worth it. Probably shouldn't have put my hands on the handles. Again, another quick shot. This is a restoration of Werner von Braun's office. He was in charge of Marshall Rocket Center. And again, you can see here the different types of rockets that were in the American space program and the sizes of them. And of course, this is the Saturn V. So, you know, I always thought it was really cool that they had to take one of the, it shows you the proportions of what's going on. Just really quickly, my students then went through what they call a Space Leadership Challenge course to learn how to work as a team. You can see them here all working as a team. Again, if you're dealing with 13 to 15-year-old, they don't work as a team very well, so it was great to see them. And then we went into our simulation training. During that time, I had 1 day off, and it was only 4 hours. No, I didn't even have 1 day. I had 4 hours off to myself, and during that time, they had gone onto a thing called the multi-axis trainer, which is the very famous thing that spins you around. And when I came back, they were like, Gil's got to go on it. You could probably hear the audio, but they got a big kick out of seeing me getting flung around in multiple directions. And this is actually the same piece of equipment that the astronauts trained on. So a lot of what's at Space Camp has retired equipment that was in the astronaut training program. What you can't hear is they're asking me questions. They told me, if you can answer questions, you can do things. So they're asking me things like, what's my credit card number? And what's the numbers on the back of it? And they got a big kick out of that. And they also were like, oh, you look totally serious. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to throw up in front of the students. It's not going to happen. Well, you know what? Because your center of gravity is in the same place, it's disturbing, but it's not what you think it would be. You probably have a worse experience on a roller coaster. I got a chance to meet Nicole Scott. Nicole was one of the people that I used to speak to on the Usenet group. She flew 3 missions and also spent, I think it's about 48 days on the International Space Station. She actually was, she talked to the students at Space Camp, so it was a real thrill to finally meet face to face. It was very cool. She actually now is retired as an astronaut, but brings the mix of science and art together. So she has the distinct honor of being the first astronaut to paint with watercolors in space. Hey, take it if you can. Again, some training for the students. These are basically, you can see here, these are simulators for lower gravity. So these are the same things that the astronauts would have had to get an idea of what the experience would have been when they're walking on the moon. And again, what I love about this is it's just a whole bunch of springs on an arm. But again, for students to get that idea and start putting these things together, it's fantastic. Again, my students came to my rescue. I didn't think I would get a chance to actually go into a simulator because that was their job. but they basically bullied them into letting me go, and I finally got to sit in the pilot chair of a space shuttle simulator. So as you can see, these things aren't as complex as all the rest of them, but all the switches do work that are there for a reason, and for a moment I got to sit and actually live out my fantasy, which was wonderful. In the final mission, 2 of my students were commander and pilot, taking some other people back. They did offer for me to sit in the back and be a passenger, and I couldn't do it because I'd probably kick them out and try to land the thing myself. One of the other things that they have there is they have one of the neutral buoyancy tanks that they used for NASA. Unfortunately, you can't see that, but I am right there. Given the fact that I I learned to scuba dive since the age of 14, and I became friendly with a lot of the staff there. They were going in there to set up a Christmas tree, and I said, "Can I join you?" And of course, my students went crazy, and they were like, "Yep." I had to prove to them that I was a scuba diver, and I actually carry my license in my wallet, so I was able to do that. This happens to be a mock-up of, I think it's the Mercury and Gemini capsule. So the idea is that an astronaut would actually go under in their pressure suit and then learn how to evacuate. So again, it was just this really cool opportunity that I'd never got a chance, or thought I would ever get a chance. At Johnson Space Center, they have the world's biggest neutral buoyancy tank. I would have loved to have seen it because they spent $1 million devising a shower that washes you from every angle at the same time, and also because of the amount of time you're in the water, heats your body up without you getting hypothermia. That's the highlight, I believe, of being in that tank. So I would have liked to have seen it. I don't think I'd be able to use it, but then again, you never know. I didn't think I'd get a chance to do that. One of the things that the students had to do was they had to create a fictitious solar system, and then they actually simulated the idea of sending a probe to it, which again tied into their simulation. They actually had to go and launch a probe. And again, what I love about this is it's not about technology, it's about understanding the workflow, understanding the physics that were involved. So these students who are walking around, they do it from 3 different distances, and they have to report on what they see. What's the details in the solar system and all the rest of it, which is kind of cool. Once they did that, we went straight into simulation training. This happened to be what was going to be the next version of space transport system for NASA. So we have one team that's in there. So we have a pilot, we have a commander, and the guys sitting here are actually on the way to the International Space Station. You can see this it's not just painted buttons and all the rest of it, and they have real-time readouts. So they're actually fulfilling a real simulated space mission with consequences. And when we actually did the mission, this is the readout that they're getting in mission control. One of our students unfortunately got sick, and I decided, I was asked to fill in for his position. So here I am at mission control, and these are some of the images that I was seeing in real time. We had one team in the International Space Station. They end up having a bit of an emergency. They speak to us down at mission control, so they're organizing all of that, and they have to do a spacewalk. Unfortunately, these suits don't look as slick as the real things, but these guys actually had to go out and do an EVA to replace some solar panels that were broken, and you can see them here on a simulated arm. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let me in to take better photos because they are hoisted quite high up in the air, and you can see here they had to work as a team to remove the panel and put it back. These guys lucked out. There is a weight restriction, and because these guys were a little bit younger, they got to take all the glory, which was fantastic. During that time, they send up a shuttle mission to grab these guys back, and of course, I'm proud as punch that my boys are going to fly the space shuttle. They've worked hard, they understand how to do it, they know how to work as a team, and what happens? They start arguing on the landing course, and they crash it. And I never let them live it down. I was like, you crashed the shuttle? My team? I was devastated. And every time we needed to get bags and stuff, I'm like, guys, go get the bags. I was like, One of the other things that they did, which was kind of fun, was that they actually built model rockets to understand different designs. Unfortunately, the day we were supposed to launch the rockets was the day that it started snowing, so we weren't able to do it. But what I do want to share with you is, this is the STEM part of it. And my good friend here, who loved to do this, he realized that USSRC, United States Rocket and Space Center, also sound very close to USSR. So here he is, putting the USSRC and putting a thing, and we'll walk around and start singing the Soviet Union anthem. And I tried to explain to him, this is not the place to do that. This is, and you're in America, and this is, you remember how I said when we're going through customs, don't be funny? Don't be funny here either, because technically this is a military base. Luckily, everyone was cool about it. In the end, they all ended up graduating and space camp. They also graduated the course that we ran as well. And you can see I'm wearing the same suit that I'm wearing now, which is cool. We ended up, all the leaders, and you can see how many of us were in this. Most of them were university students at the time, unbelievable people. It was just an incredible experience for me, so much so, for the fact that 33 years later, I got to go to space camp. I got to actually experience this thing that I saw when I was 7 years old. I mean, it's unheard of. And I got to finally sit in the pilot seat of an orbital glider. And I was so inspired by that I applied to be a STEM coordinator at space camp and actually discussed this with my wife, and I was accepted. And on the 12th of May, 2020, was the first day to go for training. But anyone know what happened on the 20th of May? COVID hit. And it shut down the world. I remember getting a phone call and they said, Gil, do you have your ticket? And I'm like, absolutely. And they're like, we're shutting down space camp. But that's okay, because out of that came a whole lot of different experiences. Unfortunately, because of different things that have gone on, these missions going to NASA and Space Camp no longer are available, and it breaks my heart. My idea was actually to go to and spend some time there and try to bring some of that back, especially now with the interest of space and STEM, with Australia going into partnership with NASA to create new technology and support these missions. But in the end, that's one of the reasons why I'm here at the Radio Club. I have a lot of knowledge when it comes to different aspects of science, electronics, and technology. But one of the reasons that I wanted to come become a member was to take all that knowledge and actually functionally work with it and apply it. So, hopefully, God willing, I'll be able to not be the only foundation member in the club and move up. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to share something that was more than just a trip for me, but it was actually an experience that came from basically a lifetime. Thanks, guys.
It's a simple question.
That's fine.
You talked about the man manoeuvring suits. I think that's what they were called. Those were cancelled in the wake of the Challenger disaster.
Absolutely.
But they had nothing to do with the disaster, so why were they cancelled?
Great, good question. Have you ever seen the movie Gravity?
Yes, yeah,
Right.
Sandra Bullock.
That's right. And George Clooney has this little part in it, and it starts off with him just doing loop-the-loops around the shuttle. And me being the space nerd that I am, I'm in the theater going, this is complete BS. They would never allow him to do that. And that's exactly why they were pulled. Because of what had happened with Challenger and the loss of a civilian, NASA became incredibly scared that if an astronaut was on one of these things and their risk of having a fatal injury or event went up exponentially once you are away or you're not tethered from the main vehicle. So that's the reason why they cancelled using the man maneuvering units altogether. And it's a real shame. I keep seeing the same pattern where we cross a threshold and then for whatever reason we pull back and we don't keep going forward. You can imagine what would Australia be like if Captain Cook went, oh well, that's far enough, or hey, we found this new land, we're not going to go back.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Gil.
No problems.
On behalf of the club, we normally give this to our in-house presenters, but I
Oh, okay, thank you so
would
much.
appreciate something to put on the wall.
Thank you. I
Thank you
really
very
appreciate
much.
it.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Very entertaining.
I do
Right.
it even better when I'm awake.
Okay, you sure haven't got foot and mouth? It's not
No,
sure?
yeah.
All right, that concludes this evening's festivities. Thanks everyone for attending. Please hang around for a chocky bicky and a cup of tea and a chat. So thanks again.